Today, I'm going to be discussing the 2023 movie Saltburn, directed by Emerald Fennell. Saltburn sort of took the internet by storm. Some of it was, of course, my algorithmic feed, but for like 2 months after this movie was released, I could not get on any social media without running into a joke about the bathwater, or the grave, or the ending dance scene. There was shot recipes and Etsy stickers, and people arguing about whether or not it was the shocking or least shocking movie they had ever seen. Murder on the Dance Floor hit #1 on Spotify's Top 100 chart. People couldn't stop talking about Barry and Sabrina. You could also buy bathwater candles. People were eating this movie up, myself included. And of course we were. It's evocative, it's beautiful, it's sexy, it's fun, and it was also rather gross. There was so much talk about this movie, and there was a lot of criticism about it as well. Criticizing it for being bad class satire, that it was making a mockery of the genre, that it was too sympathetic to the ruling class, so on and so forth. A lot of the critiques that it got were pretty hollow for the most part and rather disingenuous takes on the movie. The first few drafts of this essay were centered around rebutting these arguments, making a case for Saltburn. So here's my hot take. Saltburn is good. It has substance, it has great pacing, the characters are a lot of fun, and the actors are incredible. I don't think it's a movie that is supposed to be held in category with films like Parasite, The Menu, Triangle of Sadness. Class is a major aspect of the film, yes, but it is not a class revenge story. Class is an aspect of it, which I will get into a bit later, but class is not the main plot or theme of the movie. After rewriting this a couple times, I've decided to change the structure away from just refuting these critiques and rather examining Oliver Quick as a character. His motivations, his desires, his strange and messed up little brain that at the end of the day is the heart of this movie. If you need a refresher, Saltburn, starring Jacob Elordi and Barry Keoghan, is a psychosexual thriller with a heavy emphasis on comedy. It follows Oliver Quick, a freshman at Oxford College who befriends Felix Catton, a much wealthier and cooler and popular student at Oxford. Felix invites Oliver to come stay with him and his family at their estate called Saltburn, where Felix, his sister Venetia, his cousin Farley, his mother, and his father reside, along with a family friend, Pamela. Once Oliver arrives, he begins seducing the family members, all while his unmet desire for Felix grows. As a surprise for Oliver's birthday, Felix tries to reconnect Oliver with his mother, who Oliver had said was a severe addict and alcoholic who lived in squalor. He also said his dad died, and that he was an only child. Felix in the audience finds out that none of this is true and ends his friendship with Oliver. Oliver then poisons Felix, convinces the family to cut Farley off, aids Felix's sister in committing suicide, and refuses to leave until paid off by the father. Then, 15 years later, the father dies, and Oliver gets back in the life of the mother and convinces her to write him in her will. She then gets very sick with a mysterious illness, and he kills her. Oliver is then in charge of the estate, in charge of Saltburn. Saltburn leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Also, due to the nature of its plot and its protagonist, it greatly benefits from a second rewatch, because Oliver Quick is an unreliable narrator. The narrative is a retelling of the events of the plot from the perspective of Oliver Quick almost 15 years after most of the events happen. The movie makes use of montages and clever cuts and a 4:3 ratio. All in all, it feels as if pieces are missing because they are. It feels like a memory because it is. The first thing Oliver says to the audience is a lie he has had over a decade to convince himself of because the alternative is too much to bear. Let's take a look at each line of his introduction.
I wasn't in love with him.
He was obviously in love with him. As the director has said, just take a look at the montage following the statement. They are Oliver's memories of Felix, and his memories of Felix are his sweaty, glistening skin and smiling directly at him like a dead wife in a revenge movie beginning montage. Then, of course, they very obviously flirt with one another throughout the film.
I've not sucked any teachers off.
Not yet, you haven't. You're out, Boy Scout.
Checking his phone to see if Felix has texted him, watching him in the tub, the guzzling after the watching, breaking down and sobbing and hugging his wooden cross, and of course, last but certainly not least, having sex with the dirt on top of his grave. I think it's fair to say I wasn't in love with him is a lie. I'm not saying that this is healthy love, but whatever these feelings are, they are romantic and sexual in nature.
Everyone loved him. Everyone wanted to be around him. It exhausted him.
Felix reveled in the attention and the love that he got.
People just wouldn't leave him alone.
Oliver wouldn't leave him alone.
Especially the girls. Christ, the girls.
We only ever actually see Felix with 2 girls.
I protected him.
Oliver murdered him.
I was honest with him.
He wasn't. Quite literally everything he says here is a lie, easily disproven ones too. But why is he lying? Once we get to the end of the movie, we realize that he has been speaking to an incapacitated and very sick Elspeth. It's just him and her in that room. He could tell the truth. It wouldn't matter at all. She can't do anything. He will still end her life. She will still have signed everything over to him. He's not lying to her. He's lying to himself and by proxy, us, the audience. The movie is his retelling of the events. Everything we see is put through the lens of denial, regret, and unaddressed grief. 15 years of these emotions stewing. Oliver has convinced himself of his own narrative so that he can still get what he wants through control of the estate and Felix's relatives' lives and deaths, as well as the Catton name to some extent. The lying and denial is the only way he can have it without becoming overwhelmed by grief and regret for what he has done. After most of the movie is played, we come back to the same place we were at the beginning. Oliver speaking to Elspeth. Oliver spinning his tale.
Accidents are for people like you. For the rest of us, there's work. And unlike you, I actually know how to work.
This is the idea that he was creating for Felix, that he is some scrappy, traumatized kid who grew up impoverished and is doing the most he can with the hand life dealt him. This is the idea that Oliver used to pull Felix in. This is who he wants to be, but this is not who he is. A question that often comes to mind for me when I'm thinking about Oliver Quick is, what did he actually want? After Felix has discovered he's been lying, he just asks Oliver why he did it.
Why would you lie?
I just wanted to be a friend.
The first we see of Saltburn is a tour that is entirely focused on the back of Felix. We don't even really see the house. The first we hear from him, he is talking about Felix. The last we see of him, he is thinking about Felix. Not to mention a few other things in between. Oliver wanted Felix. And it's not hard to see why. He was jealous of him, he was attracted to him, he was enamored by him. Oliver Quigg is nothing short of a rather pathetic loser who has no social capital and wears full buttoned-up shirts tucked into khaki pants. He looks out the window at his dim and dark dorm, only to see Felix Catton in a loose, bright-colored sweater and colorful bracelets, smoking a cigarette and surrounded by people all laughing and loving him. He's attracted to him. He wants to be him, and he's jealous of him. When we cut back to Oliver, we can literally see the splintering of his desires and of himself. Oliver wants to figure out how to get into his life. Oliver is good at reading people, but he's not a mastermind. He did not have this big, long plan. He just saw someone who encapsulated a lot of what he wanted to be, and also a person that he was very attracted to. And he came up with a rather creepy idea to start some type of connection with him. Pop the bike tire, offer some help, and it works. Felix asks him to come join them at the bar. Oliver pretends to not have the cash. Felix comes in to save him. He then understands how he can keep Felix's attention, pity. So Oliver continues to poke and prod at this, eliciting more and more pity from Felix, creating a bigger illusion, but also a connection.
Baby Felix. There aren't any pictures of me as a kid. Siblings, no. And my parents, I
What?
don't see them that much.
Why?
Just, they've got problems.
What? What do you mean problems?
Mental health and addiction and stuff. Dad was kind of dealing and stuff.
Dealing. Sounds awful. Really?
Felix fell for the idea Oliver gave him. One, in the sense that he was duped by Oliver and he believed his lies, but also Felix was in love with Oliver back, just not with the Oliver that he actually is. As this continues, they fall into limerence, love, lust, whatever you want to call it, with each other. But Felix becomes Oliver's obsession. He continues to do whatever it takes to get Felix to stay. So his lies get weirder and bigger and more intense and more personal as the need for Felix does. Felix loves it. He's just like his mom.
Was it awful?
Look at it.
Both Felix and Elsbeth love having their poor pet who they can pretend to take care of until they are sick of them. Oliver uses this rather selfish aspect of their personalities to keep them loving him. But Farley, who doesn't seem to have that same impulse, can see through Oliver's bullshit. Venetia and James both end up seeing through it too. Oliver uses seduction to get to Venetia and Farley. Having sex with them was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allowed him access to different ways of manipulating them. For Farley, he used it to get rid of him because Oliver could not manipulate him. And for Venetia, it gave him more access and psychosexual control over the family. But she still ends up seeing through him too. He even gives a shot at manipulating the dad, but James doesn't fall for it.
Do you mean Bernard Palissy, the 16th century Huguenot ceramicist?
Yes. Do you know him?
I've always loved his work, but I've never seen anything of his in real life.
Felix and Elsbeth are the ones that truly fall into him. And Felix probably never would have realized that Oliver was a liar, just as Elsbeth didn't, if not for seeing the tangible proof that everything Oliver told him was a lie. Even after he does, you can still argue that he is still attracted to and cares for Oliver. Maybe he even still wants him there, but he's been too betrayed to give in to that. But Oliver's obsession is just too intense. It's too much. If he can't have Felix, if he can't control him in life, then he's gonna do it in death. To let Felix live would be to lose him. Felix would move on and find another classmate to invite to Saltburn. Oliver would go back to school with no friends, and while Felix said he wouldn't tell his family, eventually he would, and Oliver knows that. So, to keep him, he kills him. This all started in his genuine want to be friends and have a connection with Felix, but it ends in outrageous desire and obsession and jealousy. You can see the physical manifestation of that soon after Felix finds out in the mirrors, which is a parallel back to the first time he saw Felix. In his retelling, the grief of killing Felix is still interwoven into the narrative, even though he does not want it to be. He's living in a facade that he has created to shield himself from the consequences of his own actions, and yet all throughout the film, we see the intense impact the loss of Felix has had on him.
You're just turning the handle on a jack-in-the-box, walking towards the end of the world. It's the end of everything.
He will never get over what he has done. Oliver's winning at the end isn't a win at all. He is framing it as one, as if this is what he wanted all along, but it's not. And we know that. As if it was always about Saltburn the estate, as if it was always about Saltburn the house, not Saltburn what it meant to him. Is this a story about class revenge? No. Oliver does this for personal, obsessive, psychosexual reasons, and it is framed that way in the movie. But that doesn't mean that class isn't still an important aspect of Saltburn. Everything, on some level, is about class, because we do not exist in a classless society. Every piece of art and media that gets created, class will play a part. Motivation, setting, characterization are all influenced by the class of the main character, also influenced by the class of the people who created it, and the class you grew up within and exist within now affects the way you interact with art. Saltburn is no different. Usually, when people are discussing the problem they have with Saltburn, it's that it does class revenge wrong. That it wants you to side with the innocent rich people and the poor or the middle class are actually grotesque and evil. I don't think there's an argument to be made that this is supposed to be about the poor taking revenge on the rich. Nor do I think the Cattons are portrayed all that favorably. And Oliver is definitely not supposed to represent the working class. If not for this line, I'm not sure that anyone would have considered Saltburn a movie that is supposed to be a take on class revenge.
And unlike you, I actually know how to work.
As we discussed before, this is Oliver feeding into his own lie to justify his own actions. Every single line he says in the first half and the second half of this monologue is a lie. That one line is not an exception. Oliver being middle class has much less to do with him actually being middle class and much more to show the level of deceit and deception that he has created in his relationship with Felix and the Cattons. You spend the entire first half of the movie hearing this horrific note after note about Oliver's childhood. There are no pictures of him as a kid. He had to stick his fingers down his own mother's throat to save her life. His dad died. To see without a shadow of a doubt that not only has he been lying constantly, yes, about large things like no siblings, not poor, his dad's alive, but also all of these seemingly small and inconsequential details, it's sickening. It's terrifying. Felix realizes in this moment that he has invited a complete stranger into his home. Oliver's class change is to show the depth of his facade. We also get to see that all of those things that he's probably jealous of in Felix, he could have on some level done for himself. He could have started dressing more fashionably, throwing parties, going to bars, making friends. The thing stopping himself was not trauma, it wasn't poverty, and it wasn't lack of privilege. It was just himself. And the Cattons, they are portrayed as vain, uncaring, and tone deaf. Yes, the movie is on purpose trying to get the audience to be seduced by the Cattons so that we end up on a similar page as Oliver, entrenched in their fun and their laughter, their boisterous, never-ending party, and allowing their passing obscene comments by. As a viewer, you are supposed to be drunk on their opulent fun. The Cattons are innocent victims in the sense that they did not deserve to be murdered. I would like to argue that most people don't deserve to be murdered. So this is an innocence that's almost universal. They are, however, guilty of racism,
Make it a race thing. What the fuck? I mean, we're your family. We hardly even notice that you're different or anything like that.
classism,
You talk about biting the hand. Mom and Dad would give him anything he asked for.
Yeah, well, obviously you got sick of asking.
That's ridiculous. He's more spoiled than we are.
selfishness, using people they deem as less than as their own personal pets, also being crazy out of touch, rather rude, and very detached.
Pamela's funeral.
Pamela died. Yeah.
She'd do anything for attention.
The movie is upfront about this. I don't think that Saltburn is all that sympathetic to the ruling class any more than I think Succession is sympathetic to the ultra-wealthy. I personally did not walk away from this movie thinking that the Cattons are good people or that I should sympathize with them. Oliver is framing the story with what he wants to tell himself. He explains it at the end as if he has had this long-winded mastermind plan. But that isn't true. He was playing a game of chess, sure, but he never had more than one or two moves in mind. And usually, those moves didn't actually work. Felix pushed him away. Farley came back. Venetia saw through him. The dad still sent him away. It took 15 years for him to get the house, and even then, it was just on happenstance because he saw that James died in the newspaper. And then what does he get when he gets the house? It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the estate. If it was, Oliver wouldn't have had sex with the dirt on Felix's grave. The murder of the Cattons was about Oliver's need for control over this idea of a person he desired so much he fucked half his family and sucked his cum out of a bath drain. He wants them to be his pet the same way he let himself be theirs. This movie is about pathetic and perverse sexual desire with characters that are fun and beautiful, but also deeply selfish and shallow. I want to take a second to say I absolutely think Saltburn is open to critique, and I don't think it's some revolutionary movie. It exists inside a genre and pulls from many other pieces of work. What I do think is that it was misrepresented in pop culture. I love unreliable narrators. I love when a story is told by someone you cannot trust to tell you what happened, just what they believe to be true. This movie does an excellent job of utilizing that and showing you the story that the protagonist wants to tell, needs to tell himself, to deal with what he has done, and to give him the shell of what he once so desperately desired. And just for a little ending bit, here are my top 10 favorite things about Saltburn. Number 1, the grief table scene. The closing of the curtains, creating the red all around them, and it cutting back and forth to everyone. They are all the stages of grief happening inside the human heart. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. This scene makes me cry every time I see it. It's so human, and I thought it was so well done. Number 2, the fluids of the movie. The vomit, the sweat, the diarrhea, the cum, the period blood. It adds a layer of physical disgust and grossness on top of something that is very curated and beautiful and opulent. Number 3, the character of Farley. Farley is very interesting to me. Because of his place in the family, he doesn't have the same security, but he still grew up around wealth. He bullies Oliver because he doesn't want to be him. He knows that that wealth and existing in that life can be taken away. He also can sniff out Oliver's lies from a mile away. I don't think he knows the extent of them, but I definitely think he can tell that Oliver is putting on a show. Oliver's just one of those people who lies all the time. I think everyone has known a person like this. You know, someone who just tells like weirdly outlandish stories, or like it's very obvious that they're over-exaggerating. Everyone knows it's bullshit, but no one says anything because it seems harmless. But to Farley, it's not harmless because he knows his place with the Cattons is precarious. Number 4, the 4x3 frame. This movie is about what's happening on screen, but also what's happening just out of frame, and it just creates a nice visual layer to Oliver's deceptive retelling. Number 5, the statue parallels. Number 6, Felix and Venetia's tattoos. Number 7, first time viewing, they really hold you in suspense over whether or not he is gonna fuck that dead body, because they already got you with the grave, and then of course they have the little fabric pole, which he did earlier with Venetia. Number 8, this scene with Farley.
You'll cling on to it and comb over it and jerk off to it, but you don't get it back. Because your summer's over.
That's what Oliver does. Number 9, the ending. It's fun, it's energetic, but it still gives you great insight into Oliver's perspective. Is the illusion of power over the Cattons, and oh yeah, endless time to spend still obsessing over Felix. He's trapped himself in his panopticon of his own creating, probably for the rest of his life. And number 10, this is just a really visually captivating movie. You can see the attention to detail and the love for this film in every shot. Those are my thoughts on Saltburn. If you would like to hear more of my other thoughts, I have some other videos up on my channel. My favorite being one where I break down songs that I relate to A Song of Ice and Fire characters. I also have one where I have a lot of feelings about the sequel to The Little Mermaid.